Learn English through story. The whispered flame of love. In a quiet village nestled between the hills of a distant land, life followed a gentle rhythm. The people of Solomar lived in simple harmony with the world around them, their lives woven together by tradition and community. Yet within this seemingly peaceful place, love existed in many forms, some bold and spoken, others quiet and hidden, like a flame that flickers just beyond the reach of those too afraid to touch it. Alara was one of the villagers who had always lived on the edges of such feelings. In her mid-30s, she had long since accepted her place in life as an unmarried woman. A skilled healer, Alara was known throughout Solomar for her ability to cure both physical ailments and emotional wounds. People often came to her seeking remedies for everything from fevers to broken hearts, and she was always ready with herbs and words of comfort. However, despite her gift for soothing others, Alara had never found the remedy for the longing that stirred deep within her own heart. The longing was for something she had never spoken of, not even to herself in the quiet of her mind. It was a yearning for love, a love she had glimpsed in the faces of others, in the way they looked at each other across the marketplace or walked hand in hand along the riverbank. But for Alara, love had always seemed distant, like a whispered flame that flickered at the edge of her consciousness, never quite within reach. In her youth, she had loved once, a man named Cashin, tall and strong, with eyes that sparkled with mischief, had captured her heart. They had shared stolen moments together in the meadows and by the riverside, speaking of dreams and hopes for the future. Alara had believed that love was within her grasp, but Cashin had left the village, seeking a life beyond its borders, leaving Alara with nothing but memories and the dull ache of unspoken goodbyes. Years had passed, and though she had watched other romances bloom and fade, Alara remained alone. It wasn't that she had lacked opportunity, as several men had shown interest in her over the years, but something always held her back, a fear that ran deeper than she could fully understand. The fear of being hurt again, of loving someone who might leave her just as Cashin had. And so, she let the years slip by, telling herself that she was content with her work, with the life she had built, even as the whispered flame of love continued to flicker within her, unseen. It wasn't until the arrival of a new face in the village that Alara's carefully constructed world began to shift. His name was Reese, a blacksmith who had come from a neighboring town, seeking a simpler life in Solomar. He was a quiet man, reserved, with the strength of his craft evident in the muscles of his arms and the steadiness of his hands. He had taken over the old forge at the edge of the village, and soon enough, people began to speak of his skill with metal, of how his work was both functional and beautiful, as though he poured his soul into every piece he made. Alara first met Reese when she was called to tend to a burn he had sustained while working at the forge. The injury was minor, but he had come to her cottage at the edge of the village nonetheless, seeking her care. She welcomed him in, as she did with all her patients, but there was something different about Reese. His presence filled the room in a way that made her feel both unsettled and intrigued. He was polite, yet distant, speaking little beyond what was necessary, but his eyes held a depth that drew her in. As Alara carefully applied salve to his burn, she found herself stealing glances at him, trying to read the unspoken thoughts behind his silence. Reese thanked her quietly when she finished, his voice deep and soft, and left her cottage without much more than a nod. But something lingered in the air after he had gone, a sense of unfinished conversation, of unspoken things that stirred something within her. Over the following weeks, Reese returned several times to the cottage, though his injuries were small and could have easily been tended to on his own. Alara sensed that he sought more than just healing from her. There was a quiet longing in his visits, though neither of them dared to name it. Their conversations remained light and polite, but beneath the surface, something was growing, as something both of them felt but neither acknowledged. The whispered flame of love that had once flickered faintly in Alara's heart began to grow stronger with each visit. She found herself thinking of Reese more often, wondering about the man behind the quiet demeanor, imagining what it would be like to know him more deeply. But along with that desire came the familiar fear that if she allowed herself to feel too much, she would once again be left with nothing but heartache. One evening, as the last light of day faded from the sky, Alara stood by the riverbank, watching the water flow past in gentle ripples. She often came here when she needed to think, to clear her mind from the weight of her thoughts. The village was quiet, the sounds of the day giving way to the peaceful hum of night. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Reese walking toward her. "Alara," he said softly, his voice blending with the whisper of the wind. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me," she replied, surprised by how calm her voice sounded despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I come here often to think." Reese nodded and stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the water. For a moment, they stood in silence, side by side, neither speaking but both aware of the unspoken connection between them. Finally, it was Reese who broke the silence. "I've been meaning to tell you something," he said, his voice low. "But I wasn't sure how." Alara's heart quickened, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reese hesitated, his eyes flickering between the river and her face. "Since I came to Solomar, I've found a piece I didn't know I was looking for," he began. "But more than that, a broken bar. I've found someone who makes me feel like I've come home." Alara's breath caught in her throat as she realized what he was saying. The whispered flame of love that had been quietly burning within her seemed to roar to life, filling her chest with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "I feel the same," she admitted, her voice trembling with the weight of the words she had been too afraid to speak. "But I've been afraid of what might happen if I let myself feel this way." Reese turned to face her, his eyes searching hers. "I understand," he said softly. "I've been afraid too. But sometimes a broken bar. Sometimes the things we're most afraid of are the very things we need to embrace." Alara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she looked away, overwhelmed by the flood of emotions that had been building inside her for so long. "I don't want to be hurt again," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Reese stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch her arm. "I won't hurt you," he promised, his voice steady and filled with quiet conviction. "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that I care about you, Alara, more than I've ever cared about anyone." His words broke through the walls she had built around her heart, and in that moment, she realized that the whispered flame of love was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace, something to nurture, even if it meant risking the pain she had been so afraid of. Because without risk, there could be no reward. Without vulnerability, there could be no love. Alara turned back to Reese, her heart pounding in her chest, and for the first time, she allowed herself to fully feel the depth of her longing, her desire, her love. She stepped into his arms, and he held her close, their bodies pressed together as the river flowed quietly beside them. In his embrace, Alara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. The whispered flame of love, once hidden and flickering, now burned brightly within her, filling her with a warmth that spread through her entire being. For so long, she had feared that love would bring her pain, but in Risa's arms, she realized that love was not something to be feared, it was something to be cherished, something that brought light and meaning to life. Over the following months, Alara and Rhys grew closer, their love blossoming in ways both unexpected and beautiful. They spent their days working side by side, Rhys at his forge and Alara in her garden of herbs, and their evenings were filled with quiet conversations by the fire, laughter, and stolen kisses under the stars. Their love was not a grand, dramatic affair, but a quiet, steady flame that burned brighter with each passing day. But as with all things, love came with its challenges. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of uncertainty. Rhys's past weighed heavily on him at times, and Alara's old wounds occasionally resurfaced, threatening to pull her back into the fear that had once controlled her. Yet through it all, they remained committed to each other, trusting in the whispered flame of love that had brought them together. In time, Alara realized that love was not about perfection or certainty. It was about choosing to be vulnerable, to open oneself to the possibility of both joy and pain. It was about trusting in the strength of the bond they had created, even when the future seemed uncertain. And it was about allowing the whispered flame of love to guide them through the darkest moments, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. As the years passed, Alara and Rhys built a life together, one filled with love, laughter, and the quiet joy of simply being together. And though the whispered flame of love had once seemed like a distant dream, it had become the guiding light of their lives, a flame that burned brightly within them, lighting the way forward. For in the end, love was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. It was the whispered flame that brought warmth to even the coldest of hearts, the light that guided them through the darkest of nights, and the bond that would carry them through the rest of their lives. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.